So today we're going to talk about the specific ways people strategies will help a company scale. This is something we talk a lot about in HR consulting, and as an HR consultant, I'm super interested in this topic. That's all coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams, and this is the HR Hub. On this show, we talk about anything related to any part of HR. I encourage you to please subscribe to the show or subscribe to the podcast to keep learning from my guests. So today my guest is Tish Squillaro. She's a super interesting person. She's done this kind of work for 20 years with clients like Salesforce and IBM. She describes herself as an expert in, I have to read this list, organization design strategy, acquisition planning and integration, multicultural organizational dynamics, and behavioral economics. Fascinating stuff. And I think we're going to see shortly that she's actually not exaggerating. Hi, Tish. How are you?
Hello there. How are you?
I'm great. Looking forward to this. Okay, so I always dive in right away, and we're talking about scaling. So can you talk about the role of HR in effectively scaling an organization?
Most often, the place where scaling begins is with people, and whose job is it to really manage, develop, and understand where the strength of the business lies. It's the people who really work day to day on the people development. So HR professionals have the hardest and the most critical role is to really understand the people dynamics and how it's going to help a company grow.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah.
So fascinated by the comment that the most important, what was it? You said the most important role in scaling is to scale the people. And I don't think that's something I've ever heard before.
Oh, okay. Well, how a business grows without people.
Well, tell me about that.
Okay. So people really drive activity. Activity is what drives a business. And that's how you become bigger, stronger, and better. And I don't know if the leadership at times that have functional leadership roles like sales and marketing and ops and even the CEO, he or she is always focused on external growth, the competition, and really just understanding what the business needs. But the HR executive, that professional, all day, every day, focuses on, do I have the right people in the right seats? Am I giving those people everything I need to support their growth, their team's growth? Are my teams growing at the pace of the business? It always drives back to the individuals in the company. So to me, people and people dynamics are the focus that really drives scale, but also success. And if you look back and start to think about some of the things that I've done, like even in acquisitions, it's where people get lost and talent gets missed. And that's why I always try to help my clients as they do an acquisition or get acquired, because you want to nuance the different behaviors and skills that people have so they marry to what the business needs. And at the end of the day, it's always driven by how that person is developed. Do they have the skills they need? Is the business utilizing them in those skills? Most often we utilize people in the skills they're not good at instead of the skills they're good at. And we find that we don't understand why things don't get done. So again, going back to where you have to focus to scale, look at the people, understand their dynamics, their strengths, know when you might need to add people or change people's roles for the better of the business. And that's the hard job because no one wants to pay attention to those conversations or those decisions that regard people change.
Okay, so so many questions. Why don't they want to pay attention to that?
Well, one of it is you have to have a hard conversation with someone. It could be someone who's been with you forever and just hasn't grown as fast as the business. Could be someone whose skills don't match what the business needs today. Mm-hmm. And those are hard conversations to have because it really isn't anything the person's done or not done. Mm-hmm. It's just what's happened around them. So that's one to recognize. Mm-hmm. The other is sometimes you don't know how to develop someone because it is a skill that they have to maybe go out and learn through experience. You can't give someone experience. They have to go through it. So a lot of times it's someone that just can't do the job well because the experience isn't there to know things that are going to happen in advance, know how to instinctually make changes. Mm-hmm. And again, those are hard conversations to have. So the biggest challenge is getting ready for those discussions. And most people avoid them till it's too late.
So I know that you have 5 strategies that you prioritize for organizational scaling, or as you call it sometimes, to address growing pains. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Doesn't matter what your company does, and it doesn't matter how long you've been in business, you're always going to be growing, right? That's the key to having a business, is to see it grow and flourish. I've noticed over the last 20, 25 years that I've been working with companies of all industries, so I know it's all industry able, that there are 5 areas that they have to always focus on. If you're not focusing on them, there are going to be those growing pains that really hurt. If you're focusing on them, you're still going to have the growing pains like everything else, but you'll manage them. And the key is managing it and being proactive instead of reactive. So the 5 are very basic. So that's why when you hear them, you go, oh my God, we focus on those all the time. But do we? It's right people, right seats is the first thing we talked about. When you're scaling, you have to focus on the people. Well, the number one issue on people is usually they're in the wrong seat if there's a problem, right? So right people, right seats. That means, do we have the bench strength we need? Because if we're under-resourced, that's another challenge. Do we have the person with the right skill set for what we need today? So that's right people, right street, right people, right seats. The second is our decision-making. How do we make decisions? You know, it's not just the CEO or the senior leadership team that makes decisions. It's you. Every one of us make decisions. Do you do it emotionally or unemotionally? Do you do it by consensus, or do you actually do it by an authoritative approach? How is your decision-making process impacting the output? So decision-making is key. And when I look at it from a scaling standpoint and the organization, I do look at the senior leaders. I do look at the CEO or the founder, depending on the company. How do they make decisions? Because that's how the rest of the org will make decisions too. And you want to be careful on how that's done. The third is focus. Everybody can have a brand new product, a brand new service that's so exciting. But if you keep changing it all the time, is that the right focus for the business? Most teams and companies, when I come in, their North Star isn't clearly defined. Their vision of where they want to go isn't exactly the way everyone thinks it is. It's said differently by different people. You want to have focus, and focus comes from the top. Because then you can get the rest of the organization to follow the pathway. Roadmaps, paths, they make sense because they take us to a place. Well, if your company needs to grow and scale, where are we going? We need that focus. The third is leadership. How do you lead? Now, I do work at the senior executive level often. I look at their leadership qualities. Do you know how to lead? Leading is about listening. It's not just about talking. Leading is about being humble and vulnerable. It's just not being arrogant and knowing everything. Leading comes with a lot of different characteristics. So how do you lead? And how you know that is you look at how you impact your situations you're in. Are people open with you? Are they closed-mouthed? Do people tell you things that are real or just what you want to hear? That's all about understanding leadership. And then the last, which I love, is team chemistry, because it's a lot of the teamwork that I do. Matter of fact, I fly places because it is so important for teams to get together today in our environment where remote working is the new future. How do you get teams together? You build team chemistry by understanding one another. And I have programs that help people unpack and understand each other from the level of how do we make decisions together? How do we have focus as a team? You know, all the things that I talk about are growing pains. I also want teams to be equipped with tools to know how to do that. And so my team chemistry program brings teams together, and it allows them to actually hold each other accountable. And that's the key with accountability and having tough conversations. All of it does tie, and team chemistry is really just understanding how to support and recognize what are the strengths, what are the areas of challenge of my teammates. And those are the 5. So it's people, right seat. It's focus, where are we going? It's the leadership of how are we leading? It's our decision-making. Is it really producing the outcomes we want? And then it's the team chemistry. Those 5, always, when I meet a new client, a company that I'm working with, I look back at that list just to go see Where is it that we need to pay attention? And from an HR standpoint, that's their daily checklist, I'm sure, of the things that they're looking at, wanting to know more about, and how they drive scale among the business from being ahead and proactive in those 5 areas.
How do you do that? Right people, right seats. Yeah, especially in a scaling organization when things are changing fairly quickly. How do you identify what the skills are that you need in that seat and whether or not the individual has it?
So if it's a new role and we want to put the right person in the right seat, we look at the job description and the requirements. And I like to marry skill and behavior. So I work a lot with understanding someone's behaviors, because that is going to depict whether their skills will work well for us. I do think it's a marriage. It's skill and behavior. I use a behavioral profile to help me identify and have my clients identify on their own, so they don't need to have someone like me. But we look at what are needed in the skill, and it could be partially experience as well as a specific technique. And then what is their behavioral type? And type is whether or not you are someone that likes a lot of structure or not, someone who needs data and evidence to make decisions. Are you very people dynamic? Those are all behaviors. I marry that together on the building the job description, because when we go out to look for those people, we should be checking the box on those criteria. If it's an existing role and we're now looking to evaluate how are we doing with the person or a person's in these roles already, I look at performance first. Are they performing? Are you getting from that role what you need? Are there nuances or finessing that we might need to do, like work faster or get them more resources? That's not a wrong person, wrong seat situation. It's more of they're drowning and they honestly can't perform in that role, or the things we ask them to do are always wrong when we're getting it. So the performance is off. And then because I follow skill and behavior, I also look to see if they're performing, what is their impact to the organization? If they're performing, but they're murder on toxicity of everybody else not loving to work with them, or they are not good at making decisions and they're indecisive, which makes everyone frustrated. Well, now I'm looking at whether or not they can handle the pressure of the role, because those behaviors aren't matching the skill. And when we see something like that, we start to decide, okay, is it too much? So maybe it's not wrong person, wrong seat. It's too much in one role. We need to divide that role and have 2 people do it. That could be an answer. Or scalability-wise, that person isn't growing as quickly as we need, and the business shouldn't stop and wait for them to catch up. We're going to need to figure out a different role for them. So those are some of the avenues. It's not always right person, right seat means equals termination if it's not. It's most often not that. At least in my experience, I'm not the person who came in and realized they're not the right fit and they should go. That's a bigger question. It's more about how do we help them succeed in that role? And if it's something that is beyond their ability, there probably is another role that we can get them to be performing in their best.
Interesting. Okay. Focus. When you say focus, you're talking, is mission, vision, values. Is that what you're talking about?
That's very strategic. And I do think it's lovely if a company can actually stay focused on their mission and value to a T, both internal and external. I'm talking about everyday focus. If you do not allow time to become part of the growth of whatever it is you rolled out, and you change it too quickly, that's the kind of focus I'm really talking about. If you're a leader and on Monday you talk about working this way, and then next week after an offsite, you found out something new and you change it on everyone in a second, that's the kind of focus I'm thinking about, because it's those little pockets across the org that constantly change focus probably aren't marrying to the vision and mission of the company either at that point. Nothing's aligned. And focus means we need to be communicating when there's changes. So that's where my change management will come into play, because change management is also part of scaling and growth. So in focus, we have to think about change management as part of the understanding of whether or not we're giving enough communication wrapped around what it is that we're doing. And most often, that's where change management is not working, when people are not communicating, setting a goal, a pathway to where we're going, reasons to why we're getting there. Those are the things that can hold back everyone knowing what the focus is.
One final question about your 5. I know we're going to have a whole separate episode on team dynamics. Are there better types of decision making than others, and how are you helping leaders with their decision making style?
So I do look at 2 elements with decision making. One, are you making decisions? Because I meet a lot of clients that think no decision is a good decision, and that it is not the right answer. So do we make decisions first? Let's come up with that. Are we comfortable making decisions? If the answer is yes, what kind of decision-making process do we have? Do we collaborate and get information and then be able to use that information to make a decision? Or do we collaborate to get consensus and see what everyone else wants, and we try to make everyone happy, and that's how we make a decision? Or do we not ask anybody, and we're so good at this, we make our own decision and we don't listen to anyone else? I mean, there's all these different types of decision makers. So I try to unpack that a little bit first. Decision making is impacted a lot by our emotions. So after I've gone through all the different types of decision makers, I look at the decision making process. And I wrote a book series on this called Head Trash. And I'll just highlight the first book. It really covers all of the different everyday emotions that I have found as the culprit to all the problems when someone makes a decision they can't live with or was a bad decision. And there's 7 of them. And when you see the 7, you'll realize, oh my God, I have all of them. And when they're healthy, they're positive and they're very helpful. They make us human and not like AI, where it's all automatic. But when it crosses the line and becomes unhealthy, that's when I call it the head trash. It's the junk in your head that doesn't make you make a good decision. So it's emotions like control, arrogance, guilt, fear, paranoia, insecurity, and anger. So those are the 7. But 1 or 2 usually impact people and how they look at the situation, how they feel about the situation. And I created an index called the Head Trash Index, which anyone can go to when you go to my website, to allow you to identify which of the 7 gets in your way. Everyone always has one that really becomes part of the process for you. Some of it's not extreme, but it's still there. What you want to know is that you have it. And that's the one that people can look out for. So when I'm working with a team, which I did just the other day, did a whole team on head trash and how do you identify when making decisions, or an individual, after I figured out what kind of decision maker are they, do you avoid, do you take over, I then look at, okay, what is your process? And I know inside the process is your emotions. And I try to work through which of the 7 is the one that we should work on, because that's the one that probably always gets you. And it's been terrific. I love it. I have 2 books. One I wrote really to help people identify. And the second book was if you live, work, or engage with folks who have head trash. Because, I want people to get comfortable with understanding it's not just a work-related thing. So the first book was very business-focused. The second, I wanted to spread it into everyday life because I believe we have head trash at home too. So that book slants with including scenarios of the same 7. It's always the same 7. But how does it impact you personally when you're making decisions?
So you focus on those 5 areas. What about the other basic areas of HR, like compliance, HRIS systems, and integrating those into this broader scaling strategy?
I would say if you are managing performance reviews, right, which goes back to people and scale and the 5 growing pains, that would be important to make sure it's captured in your HRS system so that the multifaceted way that managers are learning to grow their teams is recorded somewhere that they can utilize. So I think technology like an HRS system or anywhere that you're documenting should be wrapped around your performance reviews, because now all the information is in one place and it's also accumulative. So it accumulates and you can see the growth or the development. How I like HR to focus, where I actually spend time with them on, is do you see patterns? because roles and responsibilities and specific functions in a business probably start to warrant people who are really successful in them and their backgrounds and their skills and their behavior, and in areas where they don't do well. And so when you're about to make hiring decisions or promotions, you can go back to that data because you've built it by having it into your technology, all the different things that you've worked on the scale process, and then give yourself the opportunity to sit with the executives and the hiring managers and bring data, because everyone loves data. And I think that's one way for HR to scale themselves in utilizing people and data together, is marry performance and growth and scale around people.
Okay, so I'm going to reinstitute a thing I did when I started my channel 3 years ago, and that's asking my audience a question. So the question for today is, are you in a scaling organization? What parts of what Tish has said resonate with you? Or what is your approach to scaling people? Let's chat in the comments. Okay, so moving on, how do you manage the balance between maintaining a consistent corporate culture, you talked about focus, and then adapting to new market demands, new opportunities? Where are you at?
So if you mean from the HR perspective, which I think would interest your audience, what I have seen and where I've supported is you have to be able to build a culture that people want to be at. I mean, not that we didn't always want to do that, but I do think you have to have that. And there are 3 things people today look for. One is growth. They want to know they're growing in an organization. They want to know they have opportunity to grow their career. They have some flexibility in how they're going to be living their lives. There is a much more, in a good way, a me focus that I do think a company has to create a plan for, because it's real.
Yeah.
And I think people leave for those things. The other is the leadership and where we're going. I do think people want to be on a winning team, or at least a team going somewhere, right? We don't want to be stagnant. So we have to be able to have the message and it solidified across the org in some way, and the same message across all the people who will talk to whomever you're hiring or whoever is part of the team, that we all going and rowing in the same direction someplace. And I think that's lost a lot because it's sometimes function driven, what people think we're doing. And I think that's important. And the last is the mission, like what we do. And there are some companies, there's one I work with that is really in the mental health space that is amazing. And I think people work there because we're going to do good things. But sometimes you have a business that's not in such a sensitive place that you can put your heart into, but you got to feel good about it and have a good reputation about it. And you have to know that we're the best that does this thing, or the way we do it really changes. And I do think there has to be something that people relate to make them want to be at your company. And I don't know any other function, any other role that could own that better than HR. And I think if they can think about a plan around those things, I do think that they could adapt to the environment. I think they could have the focus that's unique in those 3 areas and everyone knows it, and really help the business succeed.
So when you're initiating work with a new client, what are your first steps? Like, where do you start?
Typically, I work in 3 areas. So I don't know yet until I've met the client what it is. It could be an individual that I'm going to be working with. It could be a team or teams that need some nurturing, or it could be scaling. Like we're going to be, I need to grow this business. I have to make sure I have all the right people. So it depends. All of them, I would say I get to know the person I'm meeting with first to understand the dynamic of how they're going to play a part, what I'm going to be doing. And typically it's someone at the C-suite who will probably have a say, 1, if I'm the right fit, and 2, a role in what's happening. So I will get to know them and ask questions about what's challenging them or what makes them want to talk to me. Because when people are talking to me, they obviously want to do something. It's not that something's wrong, but they want to be doing something. So I'm a very action-oriented woman anyway, so I love doing stuff. And so I immediately will get caught up in whatever that is and bring excitement. And I try to unpack exactly what that is. Depending on which of the three it is, I'll need to know a little bit more about the organization. And I do love the story that they tell me, but I do want to also verify and confirm in my own view what others are saying. So I ask to meet additional people around the table to understand a little bit more about the dynamic of what's happening at the company so that I could be helpful. And then from there, I'll put my plan together. If it's an individual coaching moment, I have a plan for that. If it's teamwork and team chemistry or multicultural dynamics, I have a plan for that. And if it's scaling, I start with one of my 5. And I'll go through my checklist and ask my questions against the 5 to see which one immediately comes to mind that we should talk about. So that would be my process.
So where could people go to further their understanding of this? And basically, well, if they want to do more of what you do, how?
Well, that's on 2 questions. If you would like to work with me, you can reach me up my website, right? So it's CANDOR-consulting.com, or I love phone calls, the old-fashioned way of doing business. My phone number is available through that, and my email is tish@candor-consulting.com. If you would like to work together, that's an easy one. If you want to do more about what I do, I would probably get around the table with your executives and listen to what is the pain point each of them are sensing for the next level of growth. And then offer to put a roadmap or a plan together around some of the things we talked about today.
Well, thanks, Tish. That was so helpful, even to me as a consultant and my role with growing companies. I did an episode on performance reviews recently, and a link to that is right here. They're pretty controversial. I've also done a really popular episode, and a bunch of them actually, on organization design. One of those is right here. Thanks for watching out there. We will see you next time.